question becomes, is AI the beginning of the apocalypse, or is it the answer to things like low birth rates in Western countries and the need for immigration? KPMG's digital boss, John Munnelly, seems to think that AI is going to solve a whole lot of problems, especially for Western nations, as I said, with falling birth rates. He said ultimately the sort of work that we would have traditionally offshored to India will no longer need to offshore as much. We'll keep the revenue here in Australia, obviously, because robots will be doing the work we're relying on others to do. He says, to me, this has to be it. This has to be the opportunity for us to drive productivity without having to drive immigration. So, for instance, if you've got a warehouse that requires 2,000 workers, what if most of it was automated and you only required 200 workers? Well, then you could have a shrinking birth rate. You wouldn't have to import a workforce from overseas. You just get robots to do the jobs that otherwise would have had to have been done by human beings. And this is exactly the point that Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, made. Have a listen.
We'll be able to elevate the standard of living of countries and the standard of living of individuals, even with shrinking populations. And so the paradigm of negative population growth is going to be changing. And the social problems that one will have in substituting humans for machines is going to be far easier in those countries that have declining populations.
Now, I know you don't like Larry Fink, Liz, but what's wrong with what he's saying?
It's terrifying.
Well,
I mean, it's true.
It is terrifying because what we're saying is we're going to need less humans, which you'll notice in the backdrop there. He's speaking at the World Economic Forum, which believes that we're so overpopulated, there's too many humans. They're all about population control. So this would be music to their ears. But he said in another part of that speech, this will go very well for what he called xenophobic countries, simply because they haven't thrown their borders wide open to people from all around the world. Because, again, for the same reason, they've got shrinking birth rates, they won't need to rely on immigration anymore. Obviously, for a country like Australia, our question is, firstly, once this thing takes off, what are we going to do with the loads of people that we've imported in February, 200,000 alone? Like, we are talking mind-blowing numbers that we are funneling into our country. Is it a surprise to anyone that 1/3 of us wasn't even born here in Australia? What are we going to do with all these masses of people when you look at even the highly skilled? So it's not just low skilled like factory workers that robots are going to be able to replace. We're talking highly skilled, as we just did there with surgeons. How many jobs are going to be left for human beings to earn money, put a roof over their heads and provide for their families?
That's always been the case, though, hasn't it? Technology supersedes the last technology. People have to be retrained. They find new jobs. That's progress.
That's right, and it has always happened. I suppose the question is what happens when you hit the sort of event horizon or the tipping point at which robots can effectively replace almost all human activity. And again, what Larry Fink is saying is absolutely terrifying and dystopian, because what he is saying is that the countries with shrinking populations that are failing to reproduce themselves are all the wealthiest Western countries. So he's basically saying this new resource that will increase your quality of life will only really work in parts of the world that already have the highest quality of life. And the way that it will, the sort of double bottom line, if you like, the extra benefit is that it will remove any anxieties about social cohesion or any xenophobic instincts that people have, because you won't need to bring people in anymore. So it basically says, don't worry, xenophobes, we're going to replace migrants with robots, so you don't have to worry about, your culture being stolen or whatever, or crime or whatever. And
I don't think that's xenophobic.
What colour robots are they?
The point being is that happens. What about for everyone else in the world? For the vast majority of the world's population, this will be unaffordable. They still have no population deficit, and so it will probably be cheaper and easier to use humans instead of robots for manual labour. In the case of China, obviously, forced labour. And
although they're leagues ahead of us in AI, absolutely leagues ahead of us. In fact,
they're also leagues ahead of us in slave labour. But the point being that China has it has all this stuff that it's doing, but still it has a much bigger and much poorer population that it has to deal with, and this does nothing to service anything. There's nothing to deal with poverty in Africa or India.
Well, of course, the KPMG digital boss's point was if we've got robots doing jobs, we don't have to import immigrants, and then demand for housing becomes less, and housing thus becomes more affordable. That is a major problem in our country.